Um, Hello, everyone. Happy to be with you in a discussion about a war in Ukraine, context and consequences. And first of all, I'd like to introduce the presenters. Toma Hamid from the leadership of Worker Communist Party of Iraq, Aman Kafar, the leadership of Worker Communist Party Hikmatist official line, and me, Jamal Mohsin, from the leadership of Worker Communist Party of Kurdistan. In this discussion, we try to cover some points about war in Ukraine, the reasons behind that war, who's responsible about that, and we try to cover also the consequences not only in Ukraine or Europe, but also all over the world. When we say consequences, not only lives, missing lives, but generally, politically, socially, and in every aspect. And we try, third, to say our stance about how to oppose, or what is the opposition to the ongoing war and the ongoing situation in the world. Welcome again, dear comrades, Aman Kafa, Toma Hamid, to be with us in this discussion. Well, to begin, we have published a joint statement of our three parties concerning the war in Ukraine, and we have mentioned some political backgrounds about the by the way, our statements was just under the title "No to Militarism, No to War," which is generally covering many issues. And I'm not going to talk about what we have written in our joint statement because it's already published, and we try to explain more and more how we see the reasons behind and the background behind this war, and its political, social, and even historical reasons. So we can start with Toma about how would you see, or how would you explain the reasons? Generally the context of this war and what stands behind that. Could you please?
Yeah. Thank you for arranging this. It's nice to be with you guys. I think if you look to the history of capitalism, we see whenever there has been change in world order, where a superpower declines and others ascend, there has been periods of immense instability and violence. This happened when UK went declined and US was in ascent, and if we all read about the American Revolution and then the War of 1812. Today, the same thing is happening. It is quite clear that America as the sole power is in decline, especially in terms of economy. And we are witnessing the emergence of other poles, especially one centered around Russia and China. We are witnessing this transition period. Now the USA is clear, cannot dictate to the world how every country behaves and how manages its affairs and relations, as was happening, let's say, in the aftermath of the collapse of Soviet Union. So instead of accommodating the new powers and working cooperatively, the United States is trying, and the collective West, under the leadership of the USA, is trying to destroy its competitors. And the only way it can defeat its competitors like Russia and China is basically by organizing regime changes and balkanize these countries. If we listen and read the strategist people in the West over last few decades up until now, from Brzezinski to Henry Kissinger to up until now, Niall Ferguson, you'll see people talking about plans of dividing first a wedge between Russia and China and trying to overthrow their regimes. This has become now a very acute issue in recent years, especially after 2008, which consolidates the position of China and further causes decline in the position of United States. There was a bit of difference in the United States under Trump administration want to start with China. Now the Biden administration want to start with Russia. On the other hand, as we know, United States constantly needs enemies for many reasons, which I'll come to. So after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, this enemy for a little while was Saddam Hussein. Then it became this war on terror, or the war against sections of political Islam. And now this enemy has to directly become Russia and China. They can't do it anymore through proxy wars. So they have to face these two, in particular these two powers, like head on. So having direct or proxy war with these enemies is important to maintain the West under the leadership of the United States, keep NATO relevant to today's. We know NATO was supposed to be a defense alliance against the Eastern Bloc. When the Eastern Bloc wasn't collapsed, there were serious questions about validity of the NATO, and having these four wars and tensions with an enemy, which is now Russia and China, is very important to maintain this validity of the NATO alliance. For the Biden administration, there are some immediate reasons as well to escalate the situation. And it has to do with the failure of this administration in regard. They promised that they will deal with the COVID-19. They will deal with the hardships which were facing the population in the United States. And we see they failed in almost all these things. Now the number of deaths in the United States is reaching 1 million. United States is 4.5% of world population and represents about 16 or 17% of deaths from COVID-19 in a time that United States is very advanced, very rich, has very advanced medical system. This, in addition to the inflation, and I mean the inflation before the Ukraine war in the United States, the year to end of February was 7.9, which is unprecedented. It's the highest in the last 14 years. So all these things has led that the popularity of Biden is at lowest point, and it seems that the Democratic Party will be wiped in the midterm elections, and it's very likely they'll lose the presidential election in 2024, I think. For these reasons, and they had to escalate. The United States had to escalate and cause attention. I am still not sure whether the American plan was to push Russia to the point where of invading Ukraine, or was just to escalate the tension. Of course, at one point I forgot to mention, having war, it will keep the military industrial complex happy, and this is a very important reason for United States seeking wars. So that Russia has invaded Ukraine, the plan is to prolong the war, turn Ukraine to cannon fodder, and create a gogma for Russia. The United States is not playing any role to calm down the situation or de-escalate or immediate. They are pouring weapons worth of billions into Ukraine. They have imposed unprecedented sanctions on a G20 country.
Thomas, we are going to come back to that point, which is important for me too. But I just wanted to add something here. Thank you for the background. But if you do not only go back to that, let me say, long history, since 1991, when the U.S. was claiming that it was the only force to dominate the world, economically, socially, politically, even culturally. And after the different Gulf Wars, 1, 2, and 3, and then the occupation in Iraq in 2003, the strategy of U.S. and the political goal of U.S. has been, in a way, annulled, or I can say defeated. So it was not successful in that pushing forward its goals from controlling or being the main domain of the world. So that is a main reason also that a multipolar world has been emerged after that, let me say, unsuccessfulness of the U.S. and its strategies. So it is not only for the war in Ukraine, or the conflict does not only begin little in 2014 even, and not in the last invasion of this year. It goes back to the emerging of those posts. Don't you think so? That it's also that the U.S. that has missed control, lost the control over the NATO and the European countries, not least France and Germany, wanted to emerge, or to start as a European bloc against USA as well. So they are not under its control, and NATO has been down and down, lost its control over the areas. So they had a justification to re-emerge again, to say that, well, NATO is still the superpower and can be, and that's why they sent many military forces after 2014 and the last period before the invasion of Russia. I just wanted to add this point because it's also an important one.
Yep.
Yes, please go on.
I agree. On the other hand, I mean, Russia has been talking about serious concerns about what the West was doing in Ukraine, such as talking about Ukraine's membership to NATO, possibility of placing NATO missiles in Ukraine, which will make the flying time of these missiles to the major Russian centers only under 6 minutes. So at the time where Trump administration withdrew from the intermediate range missile treaty, and there was a bit more escalation in 2013, 2014, when there was this European Maidan protests in Ukraine, which were all legitimate, like what happened in Syria happened in other countries, were legitimate demonstrations against austerity and all that. But the West capitalized on these demonstrations, and then eventually they toppled the regime of Yanukovych and installed a far right government in Ukraine, which later on, so they at the same time from 2015 they start training and arming all these neo-Nazis, fascists, ultra-right, like Azov battalion and right sector and all these groups, and eventually they incorporate all these forces, right-wing forces in the army of the Ukraine. So, and this was the pretext where Russia annexed Crimea, and then the war in Donbas started, in the two republics of Donbas. So these were the main reasons, or public reasons, for Russia. But for Russia, I think there was more other strategic reasons for this war in particular. I think for geographical reason, Russia has very limited access to water. The Sevastopol base in Crimea is a very strategic base for Russian naval fleet, and it is the only warm water base apart from Hamim base in Syria. There was a treaty in 1997 between Russia and Ukraine, which allowed Russia to use this base and keep its fleet in the Black Sea. But at one stage, there was this possibility of Ukraine not renewing the contract, and I think that was always in their mind. That's why in 2014 they occupied the Crimea, which is to say it's mostly inhabited by Russian-speaking people, but it is part of Ukraine. And now this invasion of Ukraine, I think it has a goal of controlling east of Ukraine and having this crime, having a land connection to Crimea rather than depending on a bridge to transport all this whatever they need from water, ammunition, and not to also to mention Ukraine. And later on, probably was 2015, they decided to. Sorry, I'll just switch they decide to cut the fresh water to Crimea by building a dam in Kherson area, which was another goal for Russia to go and remove the dam, and that's what they did. So regardless of what Russia publicly is saying, there was other goals. But all these, even what I think was behind Russia's invasion, I think this doesn't explain why the war happened now. Why Russia? I mean, the threat of NATO and missiles and all these things wasn't imminent. Russia didn't try its best, let's say, to even take the problem of Donbas to Security Council. They didn't try to rally the global support to the issue of Ukraine joining NATO. They invaded. The reason, I think, the timing of the war, I think, was because Russia found that the time is right for many reasons. One, China, presence of China as an ally, especially an economic power. They thought that there's no appetite for war. I mean, United States wants to push to escalate the tension for war, but they don't want to get involved in a hot war with Russia. So they sense there is no appetite for direct war with Russia because they just lost war in Afghanistan and Iraq, because there is inflation in United States. Any direct war might even divide the whole society of the United States. So all these things, I think, made Russia feel that the time is right for them to invade. And how true, whether it is true, their view of situation was true or not, doesn't matter. But they thought even the economy, the global economy, was on verge of a recession. Europe and the West depend on Russia for oil and gas and food and a lot of other commodities. So they found that Russia can now act in Ukraine without having severe percussions or intervention from Europe. I think all these factors.
Thank you, Thomas. You have mentioned many good points and cover the background of that. There are points we have to come back to. I tried to come back to, which is so who is to be condemned? We are going to talk about that because you have talked about from both sides. That's okay, and we can, as I said, come back to who is to be condemned and what exactly, in fact, the US or the NATO had done before the war. Before coming back to these two questions, I'd like to go to Aman if you have any things to add to that.
Sure.
First.
Yeah, I think yourself and Toma explained most of the main points in terms of the background. It's always been the case of obviously the internal issues within US being one. Obviously, there are internal issues in Russia, China, and across all the main imperialist countries. There is one thing which I wanted to mention, and that is that with regard to this working of the Ukraine war, there is obviously one main issue, and that is the timing. Timing of it based on the fact that obviously it's the collapse, or if you like, at least the decline of the role and influence of US on one hand. But also I think there is another issue. What we are seeing now is that the Russian side is seeing to actually also exert a point. What is actually happening with regard to Ukraine is similarly to what has happened before, regime change. Regime change, but this time is Russia who's exercising it. Whether it is actually capturing completely the whole territory or whether it is replacing the state, in any case, is an attempt for regime change. Regime change has happened. We've seen it across other countries, and the US has been, and the West to a larger scale, has been doing this for a number of years. Regime change that we've seen, for example, an attempt in Libya, in Syria, or even the New World Order and regime change that they had in Iraq. There are many similar scenarios that have been happening with the West. Insofar as the Russian side is now concerned, or if you like, even to some extent with China at the background, this economic power is actually exercising itself militarily as well, and its role militarily. The fact that NATO has been fueling this is obviously correct, but at the same time is the world that is, as we see it today, is trying to show itself among all these major world powers. They're trying to actually say who can have what say and to what extent. The economic power is exercising military power as well. And that is, I think, one of the major issues we're seeing today. The war in Ukraine has definitely caused an issue. Russian side is trying to effectively apply military power to its intentions in addition to their economic power. And I think the new world order, as it was back in their first invasion of Iraq, and that time has changed, and Tomo did explain that, and yourself did explain that, that time has changed, and now they're reshaping and reorganizing amongst themselves, and the war of the proxies, in a way, is coming to a different scenario today. The war in Ukraine, I think to a large extent, is being fueled and has been refueled over the past few years, whether from the NATO side and from the Russian side. And I think there is also a bigger picture in here, and that is the domination which is being put forward, and that of the Europe. The question of how Europe would actually be carving up in the middle in here, and to what extent that could be changed. Previously, we had West as West, And if you like, we had Russia on the east, and the Eastern Bloc collapsed. Then we have China. But now I think we're seeing that the powers amongst themselves, they can't go to war directly. The issue of world war is definitely an impossibility now, because a world war really does mean all of the nuclear powers standing in front of each other, and it would mean complete destruction of the whole earth as we know it. So there is no case of a world war taking place any longer. The idea is that proxies were to some extent used. Now it is the case of regime change as another example of that redivision of the world and statement of the power of each one in front of the other. So to continue on this, I would say the situation we're seeing now is showing that the economic power, that of the Russia and that of China, is now showing its military power as well. They're exercising regime change in Ukraine. So effectively, Ukraine itself is not the issue. Whatever had happened in Ukraine is like saying whatever had happened in Libya or whatever had happened in Iraq was never an issue. And similarly, the issue of Afghanistan was not whatever is happening in Afghanistan. They are effectively the presence of what is being used, and the people in those countries, now today in Ukraine, are being sacrificed the same way as the people in Libya or people in Iraq or people in Syria were. None of them do care anything about what happens in Ukraine. None of them do care about the massacre that is taking place in Ukraine and displacement and millions of people who are actually being forced out. And all of their current talk about refugees and looking after them, I think these are all a hypocrisy of what we see along the way as we have seen it before. What is currently taking place is not the Ukraine itself, but what is actually at stake. And I think this is what was explained clearly earlier as well. Is a redivision and a redistribution of the world powers, militarily this time, and regime change, and it happens to be Ukraine. And
so exactly as what we're trying to say. Yeah, so exactly what you're trying to say, exactly what was happening in Iraq, the dividing of the world among the superpowers. It's the same with Ukraine, and exactly as the people of Iraq became victims, the people of Ukraine will become the first victims.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Just one point to mention. I think we have used good enough time about that. But so we are saying that it is a dispute between or among the capitals or imperialist blocs about the redividing the world and expanding their territories to get more and more even economic goals. But so who is to be condemned, because it's a question of people in the world. You know, the mainstream media, or the West media, officially they're trying to say it's only Russia which is to be condemned because it's clearly invasion to another country. What we are trying to say is that not only Russia, of course, they has invaded, of course, they has killed civil people, they has destroyed infrastructure of that society. Yeah, that's right, and that's a crime. This should be for sure condemned. But it's not only Russia which is to be condemned. It's also the U.S. led, NATO led by the U.S. and even the European countries, not least France, because they also talking about the a united military of Europe or European united military force. So for it's clear that all of the sides are after their aims and their goals. But maybe in that time, as Thomas mentioned, the timing of invasion made the point that Russia has reaped more and more from that war. I just wanted to, if you try to say your opinion about that in 2 or 3 minutes, please, Thomas, and later on, Aman. You have muted, Thomas, just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Go on, please. Yeah.
The point of Ukraine not being the main issue, that's really very important, crucial point. It's not about Ukraine, whether the invasion or the West. I mean, we need to know this problem of Ukraine didn't start on 24th of February. Didn't start. This tension and escalation and building has been going on for over a decade. As I mentioned, I mean, there was a big escalation in 2014, but this has been, I don't know why NATO has this urge to attract Ukraine as a member. What is the explanation? If it is not about constricting, limiting the power of the other pole, which is Russia and by extension China as well, why Ukraine becomes so important? I mean, there's a lot of countries in the world who are neutral when it comes to I mean, Switzerland till now, and other countries are, as well, Finland, Sweden. They were all neutral in this conflict up until now. And the last bloc or power who comes and talks about invasion and invading sovereignty and killing and all that is the West. I mean, the West. That's why you see Lavrov has no trouble embarrassing all the media, Western media, when they talk about violating sovereignty through only one thing. He just remind them what the West did in the last 20 years. I mean, the hypocrisy of the West is just enormous in this. Now there is even a worse war happening in Yemen, and no media is saying nothing. In Yemen, so far, close to 400,000 people have been killed. There's a famine. There's all this pandemic, including cholera and all this. I mean, Israel is bombarding Syria, violating the sovereignty. There's Somalia being bombarded. Drones are used all over the world, and multiple countries in Africa are being daily bombarded through drones or French forces. So this cry, outrage, which is expressed by West, and it is media because Russia invaded Ukraine. I mean, this is not condoning what Russia has done. This is barbaric. It has to be condemned. But I'm talking to that part of the to the West, which is outraged by what Russia has done, but has said nothing about Yemen and all these atrocities which are committed. So my point is, really, these are two reactionary camps fighting each other. Has nothing to do with the interest of the people of Ukraine, or for that matter, people in the West or people in Russia. And both camps have to be strongly condemned for what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Aman, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be very honest with you, the world has become, to a large extent, unsafer. Previously, we only had the militarism from the West, and mostly from the US side. Now we have it with another player in the whole world scene. So it's all the time, like the previous scenarios, the fact that it is the diplomacy does not play a role, but it's first the rule of the gun. Whoever holds the power, anything has to be solved and resolved through the might of the barrels of the cannons and tanks and whatever else, and drones. The world has now become effectively much unsafer. It's exactly the same, as I said, what was happening, or what was the policy of the US to show its military might in order to actually enforce the others to accept it and its rule. Now we're seeing that being exercised by the Russian and very likely by the Chinese. So the world does become unsafer rather than safer. I think it is absolute hypocrisy, as Thomas did say. it's not just the case that the people of Ukraine are not actually being considered. There are a lot of other areas in terms of issues that have come to the front that were for a while somehow accepted. The question now is, as I said, what happens with Europe? Who or which side does Europe side with, or can it actually stay as a pole? If you have got the Chinese, Russian to a large extent, and US on different poles, then the question comes on Europe. To what extent can Europe stay as a pole as well? So here is where we see the whole issue of a further exercise of this power by Europe as well. Militarism has expanded. The role of the military and importance of military is being pumped every day through the media. And it's not just the case that they're saying against Russia, and obviously they call it Putin's war, but nobody called it Bush's war or Blair's war or anything else like that. I think the hypocrisy is very, very clear. The world is becoming unsafer because there's huge amounts of military and militarism. The world is unsafer because there is
that
huge
might be
amount
a
of
part
pressure.
of the consequences, dear Aman, we are going to bear.
No, I mean even as the part of the whole thing, rather than actually the outcome of it. The part that is military rule is important rather than diplomatic. I think this is the sign that we saw post the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now it has been expanded. The idea that it's only through wars that issues can be resolved is more and more on the agenda. So that's why we see more and more of the issue of militarism, rather than as a consequence, but as part of the whole conflict. And I think that is definitely the case.
And even the part of the international policy from now, as you have mentioned. So that's why we may shift to change to another point. Dear Thomas, did you want to say something more?
Aman said very quickly. I mean, as you know, Germany for years didn't want to get involved in opposing Russia militarily, or even building its military. As part of going with the sanctions, the United States made a concession for Germany, and now they are allowed to spend 130 billion on their military, and this means Germany, with that civilian infrastructure and technology, means within a matter of short time will be another superpower exercise its force around the world. That's one issue. The other issue of this issue of mercenaries. I mean, the West is using mercenaries, even jihadis. They brought jihadis to the Ukraine. Russia is bringing Chechens, bringing all these mercenaries from Middle East, taking them to the look to the West. I mean, West for years was talking about having higher moral values and moral ground, and see what they're doing. They not allowing anyone saying anything which is against the official narrative, using all this giant text to suppress the discussion. So any discussion which doesn't go with the official narrative is suppressed by hundreds of ways which we can even talk about in details.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Because we have covered that, we want to shift it. Thank you. Of course they're using mercenaries, and this is a part of the war, of course. But I wanted to shift to another point or another topic in that, which is we have already mentioned some consequences, not least militarism is going to be a general or maybe characteristic of the international bourgeois policy in settling down any dispute. And even the countries they represent, I mean, they pose the strong super powers and powers are going to oppose that kind of policy on the world. Look, they are competing now and selling and buying weapons and military equipments, and even the European countries, the US, and many other countries, and even China is involved in that. They are increasing their budgets to military forces. So that's why they are militarizing, not only just as a business for getting a market for their to sell their military equipment only, but also that they have to have field, an arena to use that militarism in, and that will be a kind of characteristic from now. That's one of the consequences for me. And another one is the direct one. The direct consequence is on the people of Ukraine. Regrettably, just officially, formally, they say that more than about 4 million people have been displaced, whether inside Ukraine or out the borders. They're going to neighboring countries and many others. And even we see that the fascist regime of Zelensky is using the youth of as if that, yeah, we are heroes, national heroes of Ukraine, which who are opposing Russia. We are not accepting that and things like that. But they are using, in a way, the youth, the young people, and even old ones as I think for me, it's like a human shield, just to just to conduct their policy, as if they say we are right and they are not right. This is another consequences. And if you do not talk about the increasing of prices of everything in the world, the fuel, electricity, food. In these days, the media, in just an example, in Norway, you know what I'm saying? They say that you have to store foods and even food in cans for the next year, for the next winter, because it's going to be much more expensive. That there would be people who cannot afford even food for the daily life. Isn't that a threat? Is it only military actions? Of course, economical sanctions also against the people, and the working people, the working class, and normal people in Russia is against the people. It's not against Putin and his administration. It's the people who are going to pay the expense for the expenses. It's the people who are being the victims of this situation, not the administrative bodies, neither in Ukraine, neither nor in Russia. And this will, of course, has impact even on the world. Just as an example, Ukraine is the source of corn to many countries, just to mention Lebanon. From now, they have got about 30% of their corn products from Ukraine. And now it's just blocked, it's stopped. So it's directly affecting the people in Lebanon, example, in Yemen, and many other countries, because that will affect the price of bread and other kinds of foods. When they talk about importing things in these countries, because the source is from Ukraine and those areas. So these are pretexts for me, justifications to say that, okay, alongside militarism, you are going to pay for the expenses. You are going to, because you have to be a part of the international policy conducted by the imperialist powers. And that's another point I think we should pay attention to. And even the freedom-loving people all over the world should pay attention to and should stand against. Okay, you are creating wars and you are creating, as you mentioned, Thomas, famine and expensive and increasing prices and everything against us. So you say to us, die exactly at your homes. Why should we accept that? Why shouldn't we? I mean, so even from their sides, they are. I have read something. I don't remember the. It's one of the economic websites. They are talking. They are fearing revolutions in some countries against the situation that are coming. So that's another point. And one more point I'd like to mention is raising nationalism and even neo-Nazism and fascism in Europe. Look, now what they are doing against Russian normal people. If you're a Russian person in one of these countries, you should cover your face because they are just stempling you like Putin. You are an invader. You are a part of that. Exactly. I remember when some years ago, some people from the Islamic-ridden countries, they were just stamped by the Western countries. You are a part of ISIS, aren't you? Why? Because I'm coming from a country which is ridden by Islam. For me, it's the same fascism, which was once against those people, and now is against the Russian people. So the main point between, I mean, the main thing is to say, well, we are not Ukrainians, we are not Russians, we are not Iraqi, we are not Iranians, we are not whatever you call. We are human beings that are affected by that imperialist policy and imperialist war, and we should stand against that. We are coming back to that point again. Do you want to add something about that?
Yeah, I could.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, if you see the whole war, or if you like, any shape of a war, as literally as an aggressive, violent continuation of the policies that were in place, the mention of the changes in terms of economy, rising inflation, pressures of the crisis that we see around the world. Obviously, one of the answers in here is the suppression, insofar as the bourgeoisie is concerned. And there has been a lot of, I think, protests across the world. And let's just remember, these protests were the ones that actually pushed the current states to accept certain limitations. The people who actually flee from the war in Syria, the people who have been fleeing from Afghanistan and many of the war-ridden countries, they were people, and these people should have had the right to choose where they want to abode. And this was part of that protest, which said refugees are welcome, at least in Europe and so in many countries, that they said the states cannot actually stop people from fleeing from the war and seeking a life where they feel at least a degree of security and safety. Part of the protest also across the whole, I think, part of the West we saw into larger scale, and we're seeing some of it obviously in Russia as well. And that is the people who are saying we don't accept the current economic situation and we want a change. Part of that was answered by the right wing. We saw it through Trump. We saw it through the Le Pen in France. We saw it through the rise of the right-wing parties in Germany. We saw it through Brexit. Part of that answer was always the case that the problem is the fact that we are different. And what has happened is through this time, the same thing is being continued during the Ukraine war. And you're absolutely correct when you mentioned the issue from the point of view of bringing back what was once condemned. Post-Second World War, it was condemned to extend the crime of whatever sort to a nation, or even to not just to the family, but to a nation. The idea was that people who come from Germany were not fascists. People who came from Italy were not fascists during the Second World War, and they shouldn't be condemned. And the same thing has happened. Afterwards, we saw that anybody who came from Afghanistan was supposed to be a member of the ISIS, or from Syria, or anybody who had a Muslim religion was considered to be a terrorist. Now the cloth has changed. Anybody who comes from Russia is a criminal. And this has extended, and this is part of this hypocrisy. They have said that, for example, people who come from Russia are considered to be allies of Putin. And this has been a spread to a large extent, to so much that anybody who is Russian is to blame. And this is part of, I think, not just a event or just a coincidence. This is part of the whole policy of trying to say that there are no classes, there are no protests, there are no opposition to even the individual countries, but that they are all one nation. Idea of nation, as you said, and the blowing of the fuel of nationalism to oppress any form of opposition to class struggle that is taking place everywhere is a tool that has been brought forward again. And this is one thing which I think is not going to be lasting. It has some time, but it's not possible to extend it. The same as anybody who comes from Ukraine is not a victim, the same as anybody who comes from Russia is not a criminal, an aggressor, same as anybody who came from US was not an aggressor, or anybody who comes from any of the countries around the world is neither a victim nor an aggressor. What is happening is they're actually trying to bring forward this issue of nationalism, and they're fueling it, whether in Ukraine, whether in Russia, or across Europe. And I think that effectively, I think the civilized population across the world.
Not only here, even in Iraq and Iran, because there is a polarization. Some class polarizations, of course, and the bourgeois class in those countries too. Either they back China or Russia, or they back US or the West. So they are trying to say to the people, because we are backing the West, our people should also back that. We see that in Iraq, the political parties in Iraq, because they are, and even in Iraqi Kurdistan, those who in a way are backed by Iran have another stance. They have kept silent. They don't say anything. They don't go in details about the Ukraine war. Some other Islamic parties, they directly say, it is Russia, which is the shaitan, the Satan, to be condemned, and or the opposite. Some other of them say, no, it's only the West, the NATO, they are the only enemy of the people. Whereas, in fact, what we have also explained, it is people, or the working people. It is the class difference between the people which plays the role, not the generally, because we are Iraqis, Iranis, Ukrainians, and Russians. Toma, do you like to add, because you have not much time to go to another point? If you can,
I'll try to be very brief, but I really want to talk about the economic aspect of this. We haven't seen the full picture. I mean, the plan, the West. I mean, when Russia invaded, the West found this really an opportunity to destroy its economy, and even cause. So the plan was very simple: impose unprecedented sanctions, including dismissing Russia from like SWIFT system, confiscate the assets of the central bank, and things which haven't been done against a big country like Russia. So all this, what will do, ruble will tumble, will lose the value. There'll be hunger in Russia, and people will rise up and topple Putin. Now, clearly, this is not happening. So this will see a big escalation, because this hasn't happened. Yes, ruble lost 40%. Now it's just under 10%. 10% of what was before the war. So their plan is not working, and they're doubling down on their sanctions, and we'll see escalations. So we know Russia is big producer of oil. I mean, produced 21,000 million barrels. It is the biggest producer of gas, and wheat between Ukraine and Russia produced 40% of world wheat. All these sanctions, what will do, we saw what happens to the price of the oil, went from 60 to over 100, gas from 20 to over 100, wheat doubled in price. So these, there was, in the West itself, before the war, there was inflation. I mean, in the United States, 7.9. UK has seen the biggest drop in standard of living since the record started in 1956. So this is in Western world, and this so rich countries can cope up with 10% rise in prices, 20%, 30%. In poor country, 10% means famine. We just saw Egypt devalue its currency, Sri Lanka devalue its currency, and both of them went for bailout. They're asking bailout. Egypt is asking IMF, Sri Lanka is asking China for a bailout. Billions of people are under poverty line. Any rise in prices means famines, means people will directly die from hunger. So this, even in the West, we haven't seen the full. All these shortages, increase in inflation means increasing interest rate, means layoffs. There'll be less money to be spent, whether it is company, whether it's government, whether it's individual. This means massive layoffs, means the world will go in deep recession. So, and because the West is trying to achieve what they planned for, and it is not happening so far, so they will escalate, and that's why it's clearly what will happen, and we'll see disasters happening around the world if this is not ended very soon.
Thank you, Thomas. I think we have covered that issue too, and I'm going to mention another point, the third one, or maybe even the last one, to talk about the issue, and Aman is going to talk about that, and which is how to stand against that, or how to oppose what's to be done against the situation, the war, and the warmongering all over the world, and all the situations we have talked about. And now it's your turn, Aman.
Yeah, thank you. I think that there are several points. We probably touched on them earlier as well. All of the problems that we had, now the Ukraine war has given an excuse to it. The problem of the inflation was there before. Now it has been escalated. The problem is not in the world of global commerce. It's not the case that we see only the problem in one place. It would spread to everywhere. And I think this is a major issue to come. I think there is one thing already. At the moment, we have seen protests growing. And there has been protests before. The Ukraine war has, following the problems of Corona, has put a little bit of a break on this, but we had seen protests growing across the world. And I think the protest against the hypocrisy that the West is actually trying to put on it, and similarly the issues that Russia is trying to put, or the veil that they're trying to put on the problem economically that are existing there, these would not last very long. There is already a major demand, and I think this is worldwide. We have seen it across in the protests, that people say the war must immediately end. There has to be an immediate ceasefire, and there has to be an immediate return to the negotiations. That's definitely, I think, one thing we see across the world in every protest, in every march, and in every angle of the society. We have seen this throughout Europe, right up to Australia and the US and Russia. Everywhere, an end to this war, an immediate end to this, I think, is on the agenda. The second point, which definitely is on the agenda, is suddenly deciding that now everything has to stop. So these people who are fleeing war zones, they have to return back. I don't think that is something which the civilized world is accepting. They're not going to agree to this idea of people becoming just recognized as refugees, short-term, etc. The right to abort and flee from the war zones is a right that must be recognized. There is also a lot of protest already against nationalism, against the right wings who are actually using and abusing the current situation to expand their own ends, from the people who carry out people trafficking from the point of view of getting people into their own circles of gangs and mafias, right across the whole spectrum. I think that is also brewing across the whole society. And coming out of Corona, I think to a large extent is showing its impact in terms of the protests that are taking place across many societies. One thing which is definitely is on the agenda, in addition to stopping the war, is a call for an end to this military or militarization of the world. I think this is another major point, whether it is from the point of view of Russia, whether it is China, whether it is US or Europe or anywhere else. I think the world is actually seeking security and wants to see an end to militarization and use of an expansion of militarism, an expansion in the military budgets rather than actually dedicating the budgets and whatever exists to what is the requirements of the society. And this is definitely another point which I think is on the agenda. So we've got stopping the war, stopping militarism, against nationalism and right wing, seeking security, improvement of life. And I think these are, we're seeing only the early buds of this, and these are going to grow and escalate. In addition to all of this, I think we are seeing a change in the world, and this means that the old ways are not working. This is not working from the point of view of the states, and it's not working from those who are supporting one side or the other among the states. This is something which I think is brewing, and therefore our alliance should be with those people in the world, as was mentioned earlier. People in the world have got no interest in these borders and in this militarism. People across the world all want to have security. They want to have a sense of safety. They want to have a decent life. And at a time where we see people are going into, or humanity is able to actually go and use technology to go to moon and beyond, and be able to actually use all of the technology, it's senseless to notice that this technology is being used to build up a variety of weapons and warmongering policies that are to ruin us as a whole. And I think that is also another area which is growing fast across the world. And our job would be, I think, to promote that, to promote an end to war, an end to militarism, an end to hijacking and abusing any, even the slightest skirmish towards the right wing. And this is one thing that has to be built on. And therefore, the issue is not just against Russia. The issue is not just against NATO, but is for recognition of the whole scenario that is being put in front of us. And I think that the future, at the one time, on the one hand, has the unsafer scenario which is being planned and implemented by the superpowers, that is reaching an opposition which is growing across the world, and we should allocate with that, and therefore recognize that any other protests or any other demands that actually divide us, whether it's pulling us towards anti-Russia or anti-NATO or anti-state, any one of these on their own would not give us the full picture. I think international solidarity and recognition of the right of people of Ukraine, the protest and rights of people of Russia. And we are seeing this. We're seeing the, as I said, early buds of this. We see, for example, the dock workers in Italy who decided to stop the cargoes that was supposed to be under humanitarian aid and were carrying grenades to Ukraine. we saw that in there, and they said, we don't want any part of this. We want an end to this scenario of militarism rather than actually fueling it. We are seeing more and more of this protest and growing of this, and standing against the right-wing fascists that are trying to take advantage of this and put one flag in place of the other. And this is, I think, what we have to build on, and this is what international solidarity could do in order to actually oppose all of this variety of horrendous events that we're seeing around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Aman. Well, I have to. Do you hear me? Yeah. You have mentioned good points how we could stand against that, and what's a good policy against the all poles could be. I just like, I mean, I know it's clear, but I want to just clarify more. Only having the slogan of "Stop the War" could not be effective, and even a progressive one. I don't mean that you have said that, no, but because you have explained why we need that the war should be stopped exactly now. But it's not only this war, because we have already talked about that. That there would be militarism and even maybe other wars in other countries. China is disputing with about Korea and other countries. So it's not only the case of that Russia wants to get its own part. The other ones we have talked about that. So for me, the active policy is that, or maybe a slogan is to stand against all militarism and all kinds of wars that they are threatening our globe with. This is a good point. Another point is I just like to mention is that the working people of Ukraine exactly could be unified with the working people in Russia, and that could be a part of our agenda as communists. Yeah, we know that generally the situation, the universal situation, has proved again that only solution is socialism. Only solution is to get a socialist world. But we are not in that phase. Okay. So the workers of Russia and the workers of Ukraine should be united both against their states, and this is the main thing for them there. We have seen also many demonstrations in Russia, which is even also suppressed, as you said, by the Russian regime. So they know that there is a class struggle again, that there is the process are not only just superficially saying that we are against that or we are against that. It's clearly the socialists and many work activists, they say that, and they have said in their protests that we are totally against any invasion from Russia or any other country, and we are against war generally. That just was a point I wanted to explain more. Thomas, do you like to add something?
I think you guys covered almost everything, except I think the struggle against this climate change and connecting all these things to the struggle for green policies and putting limiting this climate change is very important. You see, I mean, the war is the worst thing a human race can do for the climate and for environment. I think that should be part of the struggle. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Aman, any point to be added? Or do you have any?
No, I think we have it. There is one thing that I think we also have to bear in mind, that the idea of this current conflict, at one way or the other, there would be an end to it. The talks and negotiations have already started. They say that it has gone to some extent of arriving at a final decision with Ukraine not joining the NATO, and in exchange Russia moving all its forces, military forces, away from the Ukraine territory, or even discussions with regard to what happens inside Ukraine. I think that what I'm trying to say is this conflict, one way or the other, would come an end. But if one puts themselves right in the center of the whole place, if you were a worker in Ukraine right now, the first thing you want is definitely a stop to this war. Mm-hmm. 2 is the continuation of or a promotion of the class struggle. 3, putting away all the hypocritic and the issues of that has been put forward, whether the media from the Russian side or whether the media from the Western side, that they are clouding and effectively distorting the events that are happening, and recognizing that this struggle was taking place. The Ukrainian state is not definitely not for the sake of the people of Ukraine, and there were a huge amount of protests taking place within Ukraine at the time before the conflict, and we had seen it during this conflict and even today. And they're trying to establish that as the rule of what they call rule of the people, as a democracy of the recognition of the people of Ukraine. I think that there is class struggle and recognition of that within Ukraine, and the protests which are taking place in there, similar to Russia and similar across the world. But in a word, I think the human or civilized people across the world, they have shown it. What I'm trying to stress is it's not that there is no opposition. We are seeing this opposition, and we're seeing expansion of this opposition. And this is something that the whole world, the states, cannot stop. This is something which is happening. It was this civilized population that said refugees are welcome here during the Syria conflict. And it is the same civilized world that doesn't accept the current status quo, nor accept the media propaganda from both sides. Tech giants banning one or the other, similarly the Russian ones banning one or the other. I think this feeling of that we do not accept either is growing, and it's what we can build on. This is what already exists. And I think none of us coming from countries in Middle East are unfamiliar with this area of that somebody from outside is the foreign invasion, which is the problem. Recognizing all of this, I think, and building on it, is what we have on hand. And I think that the international solidarity is going to grow. And what we need to do is to help it and support it and take part in it.
Yeah, strengthen it. Yeah, thank you, Aman. Thank you. Toma, would you like to have your last words, please?
I just agree with all what you said. Is really the bourgeois is trying, the ruling class is trying to portray this conflict as a conflict between globalists and nationalists, and between West and Russia and China. This is really the impact of all these conflicts. These wars will, the working class will bear the brunt of these conflicts, and it is clear for a person living in any of the country that that this has nothing to do with the interest of an, let's say, ordinary person living anywhere. And sooner or later, no matter how much, what is the size and amount of the propaganda they push out, things will be very clear. We just need to do our best to expose all this and remove this cloud which is pushed day in and day out by the media.
Yeah. Thank you, Toma. I think we have covered the main things, the main points. The only thing I'd like to add is to that we are a part of that struggle. We are a part of that struggle against the war and the warmongering policy of all the other imperialist countries and poles. I think it is a part of our duty, especially these three parties' duty, to expand the struggle, to have dialogues and debates with the other leftists and socialists and even communist parties and organizations through Europe and other countries, to strengthen that struggle, to have that international point of view and outlook that we have talked about. And I think this is a great job that we are trying to get ready for through the our works forward. I think we have come to the end of our discussion, and we have covered. We tried to cover the reasons, the consequences, and how we can oppose that part. Thank you, Aman Kafa again, Toma, Hamid, and thanks for me too for getting that or arranging all this good discussion. I hope that wouldn't be the last one. We try to have debates with other parts whenever we have contact with them. Thanks again, and thanks for you too.
Thank you.